Hello peeps, this is a Hillbilly halfwit here today, and today we're talking about Tony Blair maybe being the new leader of the World Economic Forum. This is personal for me because I can't stand the guy, and it got me basically listening to politics. Many years ago when I used to drive a forestry machine all the time, 24/7, I had the radio on all the time, and I remember listening to the Iraq inquiry and the Hutton inquiry on Radio 5, and basically everybody that was interviewed on there that they didn't say on the normal TV and mainstream media wasn't under oath. I remember him saying at the start of the inquiry, none of this is under oath. So they all lied to their teeth and nobody knew nothing about it. I used to tell it to my friends that it wasn't under oath and I was laughed at, but I'm telling you it was true. Right, if you haven't commented, rated, subscribed, please subscribe. Press that little button down there. It only takes a minute. And like, and share if you don't mind. Because as you know, YouTube are on my case a bit and stopping me at the moment. But never mind, onwards we shall go. So what I'll do on this, I've gone on to Tony Blair's Institute and other things and underlined what this guy is actually pushing, and the WEF. It's pretty scary stuff, like I always say. So let's get going. Before I get any further, YouTube allow me to do this video because I'm only doing what is underlined below in the rules. Funny or thought revision of content that I didn't create, clips of other people's content as part of a critical review, reaction videos where you comment on the original video, edited footage from other creators where you add a storyline or commentary. And that is me. Now then, breaking. Tony Blair has emerged as the leading candidate to replace Klaus Schwab as chairman of the World Economic Forum. They have managed to replace Klaus Klux Klan with the only person on earth who is more evil than him. And I totally agree. This is a warning to people now who are thinking to vote for Starmer during this next election. He was exactly like this, Blair. They thought he was the second coming and he was a lovely guy. This guy turned into one of the most evil people has ever been running the UK. And he's still at the middle of it all and possibly almost running a lot of the world now in the top 10. So let's get going. I think this guy should be in prison for war crimes. I've always said it. But he had the right contacts and the civil service were behind him all the way. Now, the more I've looked at all this over the last 3 months, the more I've realised that we are in an Agenda 2030. I didn't realise this at the start, but everything that is on here is what is happening. So let's just read this out a minute and see if you can recognise any of this. The Great Reset, One World Government, Fourth Industrial Revolution, Technocratic corporatocracy, can't even say that. Total dependency on the state, definitely. Social credit system, yes. Carbon footprint surveillance system, yes. Universal basic income for compliant citizens, yes. Programmed central banking, digital currency, yes. Depopulation, not sure about that. But depopulation of the original inhabitants, yes. Mandatory vaccines for all ages, yes. Controlled fertility and reproduction. I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know enough about that. Radical assisted suicide and abortion laws. Don't know enough about that. 100% genetically manipulated food and soil. Yes. Ban on natural remedies and treatments. Yes. Robot workforce. Not yet, but it's coming. Internet of things and internet of bodies. Don't know what that means. Microchips and implantable brain interface technologies. Yes, Musk has done that already. Constant exposure to non-native EMF and RF, 5G, 6G, 7G. It is coming, but I don't know enough about that, so I can't say anything. Destruction of genders, yes. Destruction of motherhood and fatherhood, yes. Rationing of energy and all natural resources, yes. Restrictions on non-essential air travel, yes. Smart cities, yes. Drones, facial recognition cameras, movement sensors, yes. Abolishment of private property, that's starting to come. Control and surveillance of nature and wildlife, yes. Restricted access to wilderness, human-free zones, yes. That's what's happening on the hills here. Sustainable development of the New World Order. Is this the world we want for our children? I tell you what, 95% of that is already here. Now, until I started doing this 3 months ago, I would have never have, I'd have looked at that and took one glance, but now I look at it and I think, oh my God. Now, after I found out that he might be the leader, I thought I'd better go on to Tony Blair's Institute for Global Change and see what's going on. What is his ideas? So I've gone on to a few things. I'll only read the bits with the red on. This video will go on for too long, but if you see, you can just click on these and read the lot if you want. The public is also aware that the UK makes a relatively small contribution to global emissions, as we all know. So progressives are Blairs really, Blair clones, left Labour leading people who want, that's what they call themselves, progressives if you don't know that. Everybody else is just nothing to them. They always want to be called progressives. That must also focus on how the UK can contribute to global emissions reduction. Emerging economies will need to limit emissions from industrial development. British policymakers could build on the UK's strength in science and finance to deliver the low-cost technology and funding requires. Sounds all nice and dandy to start with, isn't it? So we'll go down to where I've underlined. Finally, progressives must communicate climate policy in terms of what the public cares about and what works. Politicians should focus on tangible benefits and impacts of net zero delivery on the economy and jobs, highlighting successes. Because the public is aware that the future of emissions reductions must be delivered by China and other countries whose economies are growing rapidly. Policymakers must be honest and open about these challenges. So they know our country does nothing, but they're still forcing us. The recent backlash against green policy in Europe should open progressives' eyes to the political challenges of achieving net zero. Despite what people say in polls, when the costs of green policies begin to hit, support declines, and it doesn't take a large loss of support to effect a great change in political landscape. If progressives wish to make net zero a reality, they must begin to develop and communicate green policy in a way enabled to be electrical asset rather than electrical, I can't say that, than a liability. They are scared. Now, after reading this, like I said, I don't like the guy, but I have realised they are quite scared now because in the EU, there's a backlash by people and they're losing their political power. So they're trying to change tack now. Instead of scaring people, doom, as they say, they're trying to change their tack. Now, listen to this now. I have to read most of this one. The United Kingdom, I hope you stay with me on this because it's quite good. In the United Kingdom, this pattern has not yet come to full fruition, although there has been occasional localised objection to climate policies. For instance, in the recent Uxbridge by-election, there has not yet been widespread rejection of green policy. Yet many of the deadlines for most significant policies are still in the future, so their costs have not yet been fully felt by the British public. The deadline to end sales of new petrol and diesel cars in the UK isn't until 2030. The gas boiler ban isn't planned to take effect until 2035. Once these policies come into force, these most affected will likely push back and may draw substantial sympathy from less affected groups of voters. This is good for us because they have realised, due to the backlash of especially farmers and farming community in Europe, they are starting to see that they're losing support and they could lose power. So they're changing their tack a bit, so be ready for it. Now listen to what they say about people who disagree with them. Now you don't have to be from the left or right. It says in here. It actually says here somewhere from the left or to all the right. So they're calling people right-wing that were left-wing. The right-wing populists are best positioned to take advantage as support for these policies wanes because they've been the most consistent critics of green policy in Western democracies. And it doesn't take a large increase in support for populists to cause a large political shake-up. The BBB only received 19% of the vote in the Dutch regional elections, and the AFD is up by fewer than 10% points. But these small increases have been enough to cause significant political tremors in the Netherlands and Germany. The threat of populist opposition does not mean that the net zero policies should be abandoned, but they are scared. They are thinking about it. They are scared. We are making a difference. Do not forget that. We are making a difference, and don't give up the fight, people, because they are afraid of losing their power. It does, however, mean that the progressives must build an electoral strategy around net zero, with deliverable policy that can retain support across successive elections. They must assure the public that green policy will address the highest emission areas and introduce measures that make costs manageable. These policies should be presented with optimistic messaging that draws on the success. First, people want to know that net zero policies will be effective. Policymakers must focus on the sectors and actions that make the greatest contribution to emission reductions. Now listen to this bit. Remember, this is on the Tony Blair Institute's own website today. While London Mayor Sadiq Khan's ultra-low emission zone, ULEZ, and particularly its forthcoming expansion, is not first and foremost a net zero policy, it is an example of a policy that gets this relationship backward. It will have little impact on emissions and yet will carry high costs to those least able to afford it. There it is in black and white. It's nothing to do with the climate. It's just about removing people, the poorer white person from London. Progressives would be wise to focus on the underlying enablers of the transition, such as expanding electricity grid or speeding up the planning system. We're starting to get to the bottom of all this. Across Europe, a backlash against net zero policy is underway. While polls show that an overwhelming majority believe climate change is a problem and support policies to address it, that support starts to fall once green policies come into force and people begin to experience their costs. To ensure a smooth transition to net zero, policymakers must begin to develop strategies to reduce and address resistance to the green policy. We are winning this, people. We are winning the fight. I don't think people realise it. If we had a candidate like Farage or somebody like that who would go on a candidate of removing this net zero law from UK policy, he would sweep the board. Whether you like him or not, it would stop all this in its tracks. Now, like I said, I have to read these bits out. It'll go on for too long, but stay with me. In 2021, an Euro poll said that 71% of Dutch and 67% of German respondents said their respective governments were not doing enough to address climate change. Yet in the recent Dutch upper house elections, a new anti-green party, the Farmer Citizen Movement, won the most seats of any party, largely based on the opposition to the country's nitrogen emission laws. In Germany, the Green Party is polling at its lowest level in the last 3 years, while the climate skeptic right-wing populist alternative for Germany, AfD, is polling at its highest ever levels. Opposition to the country's Green Party minister plan to move renewable heating deadlines forward appears to be behind these polling numbers. And when the city of Milan introduced a ban on high-emissive vehicles from its city centre in 2018, those whose vehicles were banned became more likely to support right-wing populist Lega Party. While people support policies to address climate change, in the abstract, resistance becomes much stronger. When policies begin to take effect in the Netherlands, in Germany, and in Milan, people are beginning to experience the personal costs of climate policy. and this is leading to a decline in support for the parties that back it. If this trend continues, the issue could become a new source of support for far right-wing populists. It's democracy. You're not far right if you just disagree with being bullied by other people, rich people in a club, in a cult, who think they should have the right to tell you what to do. Now, this is on there as well in his own thing, so please stick with me. How to address the growing backlash against net zero policy. Oh, how important is it to get the message right? Now, listen to this. The first message was a technology delivery message. It highlighted the positives, how climate technology developments are increasing the effectiveness of emission reduction measures, and how this in turn makes government climate policies more effective. It is likely that the public will become more trusting of governments. Both in Europe and around the world, if presented with information on how the technical aspects of dealing with climate issues are becoming more achievable. Recent evidence has shown that among the strongest ways to get people to support climate policy is convince them that the policies will be effective. Now listen to this next bit. This is coming from the Tony Blair Institute, so you know what's happening. This is all civil service led. We contrast this with a pessimistic doomer message, emphasizing that we are falling short of achieving our climate goals and that without fast and dramatic action, the earth will warm to a catastrophic degree. Many climate activists and policymakers believe that the best way to get the public to support climate action is to make them aware of the grave nature of the emergency and the likely consequences of lack of action. However, some evidence suggests that this approach could just serve to encourage apathy, especially among those who are less concerned about the climate. See, it's all designed. The MUDS units around the world are designed to brainwash people. Now, this is what I found brilliant. We also found that concerns for farmers is shared across the political spectrum. The farmers' message had a strong negative effect on support for the Green Deal, even amongst those who support left-wing or Green parties. See? Now look where that arrow is. Soon as the farmers started protesting, it dropped. It dropped by 50%. And then after subsequently environmental groups rebutting this stuff, so they put the media in there and started removing the farmers off the media, you know, like they have been, like people who follow me noticed that the French and the protests were all removed off the media. That's when it started to rise again. People like farming. People love farmers. And don't believe this nonsense to say it's not true. I won't read that there. Establishment is working against us all. From 8th to the 15th of March 2024, the Tony Blair Institute worked with YouGov to survey attitudes to net zero transition across EU member states and the UK. They're working with the civil service. We are all being farmed, people. Now, when you read this stuff, it took me ages to read this stuff, sorry. So that's why it's been a bit of a long one today. Climate technology message. Climate, I've said the word, haven't I? I'm going to have a warning now. Climate scientists have said 2023 was the year global CO2 emissions likely peaked due to advantages in technology and the spread of renewable energy. So if they're at their peak, they're not going to go any higher. But they're still pushing this nonsense. I read this climate doomer message. False information. I read all that. It's all false. Climate and weather-related disasters have increased by 500% in the past 50 years. Absolute and total nonsense. If you go onto the NOAA website, and you can see that straight away. It's nonsense. Now, this is what the EU Green Deal is. Basically, the WEF, Tony Blair Institute, this is what we have enforced on us. A new piece of legislation has been proposed called the EU's Green Deal to transform at least 30% of the EU lands and seas into effectively managed, protected areas for biodiversity. So land and sea, that's our hills. That's where farmers are at the moment. Farmers attack message. A spokesman for the United Farmers Coalition has criticised the policy, saying, as a representative of the farming community, we are deeply concerned about the implications of the Green Deal on our livelihoods. Over 6,300 agriculture-related businesses in the UK have closed since 2017. Nearly 5,000 meat, fruit, vegetable and dairy farmers have lost their jobs in just 15 years. The EU has lost close to 40% of its farmers, almost exclusively small and medium farms who have gone out of business or been bought up by increasingly large competitors. Many of the costs of the Green Deal will fall on our members by 2030. We have to reduce pesticide usage by 50%, remove 10% and 20 of 2020 farmland for reforestation and restoration. This will drive up costs, reduce yield costs by 12%. It's going to destroy farming, and it's actually said that the small farming is going to get destroyed. It's going to be destroyed. So it's just brainwashing people. I'm sorry, people have no idea what's coming down the road. 2033 to 2037, the budget requires a 78% reduction in UK territorial emissions between 1990 and 2035, which represents 63% reduction compared to 2019. So we've got some serious stuff coming here, people. We've already seen this play out in Germany with public opposition to eventual government U-turns on gas boiler ban, and across Europe with the farmers' protests. People will have the final say on the net zero transition, so without a plan to address these concerns, progress is likely to halt. So they know we are winning this fight, people. We are winning this fight. Surface transport emissions need to reduce by around 70% by 2035. This assumes a ban on new internal combustion engine sales by 2032, as well as a 9% reduction in car miles travelled by 2023. Commercial transport zero-emission vehicles are to make 96% of new sales of heavy goods, buses and coaches by 2035, almost 100% by 2040. The Climate Change Committee's pathway agricultural emissions need to decrease by 28% by 2035, and net emissions from land use need to reduce by 93% by 2035. 93%! Compared with 2018. The Climate Change Committee pathway suggests 1/3 of agricultural land will be freed up through changes in output and more efficient farming practices, and 21% of this land will be designated to sequester and reduce CO2. So farming is going to be destroyed. If you don't know that, it's going to be destroyed. Now, this is the end of this now. Sorry it's gone on for so long, but I just have to show you this. I hope you stayed throughout it, but that's what's making me put a smile on my face. Our farming protests have made a big dent in these people. They really have, and we need to keep doing it. Don't give up, because they are scared of us, people. They're having to change. They're having to change their attack because the doomsday attack is not working anymore. Now, it's all about this year. Most of it has already been done. And if he's going to be in charge there, it doesn't really matter if he isn't in charge. It'll still be there. But these things that I've read out now are all off his policy. So, sorry about it being a long one today, but please comment, rate and subscribe and share this stuff out there because people need to know about it. People do not know how evil these people are. And we are being, basically, Western world is being farmed by these nutcases who want to take away our individual rights and have us told what to do by the state. So I'll leave it there today, okay, peeps? Ta-da!